planning with our oil well. So currently there's a very weak link between data and policy design and implementation. That focus on oil earnings for consuming and the presence of inadequate planning over the years has now led to other issues that is realizing that vast potential a challenge. For example, we now have infrastructure issues. There was a time we didn't have infrastructure issues, but poor planning, power issues, poor access to finance, a very largely unskilled labor force that can't find enough jobs. This perennial focus of marital development in the Western flank and the neglect of the Eastern flank, for example, the lack of proper port categorization, how it has affected the incentive for bringing in mineral fuels, cars, exports, and so on to that Eastern flank. A lot of oil revenues coming in. So again, at the same time, no interest in developing those areas for tourism. So I think we also felt we could rely on subsistence farming, and anything that we could not get from our subsistence farmers, we just decided to use our oil revenues to import them. You can also take into consideration the refusal of government, for example, over the years to move solid minerals from the exclusive to the concurrent legislative list and develop a proper mining framework that can unlock investments into developing solid minerals from supply chain of heavy industries. You can also add the perennial burden, the lack of reform of the Land Use Act and how it has stifled development of the primary production layer of investments in the real sector. And then many, many of these issues. But again, they are tied to these three main issues that I highlighted: the over-dependence on oil, the unforced errors, the fact that we have not adhered to proper planning since 1960. So these are things that I think are continuing to prevent us from taking advantage of this huge potential that Nigeria has.
Dr. Kali, thank you so much for that. Very comprehensive key advantages and then the factors that are underutilizing those particular advantages. Thank you so much. I want to move to Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist over at PwC Partners. Well, Dr. Nevin, you've always been from the perspective of key advantages for Nigeria. You have been an advocate for a self-driven Nigeria. You've also talked about the need to unlock dead assets. Can you elaborate on both of those for us, please?
Well, thank you, Rhoda. It's great to be here. Please don't call me doctor. That makes me feel old. I mean, I am old, but it makes me feel old on that. So, if we look at the things that are, the list Dr. Kali has is absolutely true, but let me list out a few of the things that we're already successful at on it. So, Nollywood is a success. Nigerian music is a success around the world. I mean, it's incredible. And everywhere you go now, people are playing Nigerian music. And actually, the PwC AGM, we were lucky enough to have Fireboy play live for us. Sadly, I live in Abuja, so I got the streaming of it. But the 1,000 people in the Lagos got to see Fireboy live. It was absolutely fantastic. Financial services, UBA, Access Bank on the march across Africa. You might have seen. It was in fact, I think Nairametrics reported that half of UBA's profit came from outside of Nigeria. So, tremendous success there. The biggest export global export, of course, Nigeria's ever had, and he counts himself as Nigerian, of course, is Giannis Antetokounmpo, the superstar center for the Milwaukee Bucks. And it's one individual billion-dollar franchise. I can tell you he wouldn't be creating $1 billion of value if he's playing basketball in Nigeria. And of course, we have to look at the Premier League as well. I mean, we watched Taiwo and he keep Nottingham Forest up in the Premier League with 5 goals in the last 3 games. Iheanacho, Iwobi just elected the top player for Everton on that. Eze over at Crystal Palace kept them up as well. So we already have lots of things that we're doing on a global stage that we're very successful at. And they all share one common characteristic, which is the government had nothing to do with them. And when we talk about the diaspora, the government had no diaspora policy, no diaspora thinking, and yet this diaspora is getting bigger and bigger, and of course contributes more to the economy than oil does at the present time. At least 20 billion in official remittances, but in fact the actual remittances are much more because so much of it is done through individual person-to-person, Aboki type systems on that. So this self-organizing capability from our perspective at PwC is really, really powerful. And the sectors that are doing really well on a global scale, where people are competitive globally, are ones where, in fact, the government hasn't been involved. Where they have been involved, the refining sector, the oil and gas sector, manufacturing sector, all agricultural, all these policies that we've had in different sectors have not borne fruit. And that's why we come from the viewpoint of a country of 200 million people, incredible talent, incredible resources, as Dr. Cowley said. It would be much simpler, much more effective in our view if the country relied more on this self-organizing impulse of Nigerians, and things happened at the local level and happened at the state level. So it was a great move forward, for example, in our view, because we've advocated for years electricity should be a state matter. It was moved from the exclusive list to the concurrent list a few months ago. Lagos has come out and said it will organize electricity. I'm pretty sure any state that wants electricity can figure out how to organize itself. And I think Dr. Cowley is exactly right on the minerals. I mean, one of the things that I've said over the years publicly is in fact, there's no large scale mining, no world-class mining in Nigeria, despite all of these world-class deposits. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons for it is in fact, because it has the same economic model as the oil industry, which has not worked well for the communities that it serves. And the investors, or the large-scale mining companies, look at this regime and they say it's unworkable because we're not going to have enough left over to pay to support the local communities when all the benefit, except for 13%, is going to the central thing. So to the central entity on that. So when we look at that, where Nigeria succeeded on the world stage as being in the absence of the government and just Nigerians going out and succeeding, whether it's the diaspora, the export of services, financial services, football, music, basketball, in the case of Yanis Adetokunbo. And where we've struggled is where the government's brought complexity, overlapping jurisdictions, too many players on it. I mean, when we look at the number of MDAs in Abuja, it's just, we can't keep track of them. And every industry is subject to, multiple regulations, multiple taxation, multiple fees, multiple levies that just make it impossible to do business where the government is heavily involved. So that's why we came out with the idea of the self-organizing principle, because that's where the success is for the country. That all said, you and I, Rhodas, have talked about this many times. I'm incredibly optimistic. I'm even more optimistic after the inauguration. I really think we're getting close to liftoff in Nigeria.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew Nevin. Now, what about the debt assets? Can you speak to that?
So we put out the paper on debt assets a few years ago before COVID, and we said, look, the country's incredibly rich. We just have too many assets that produce no return. We have Ajaokuta Steel, which produces no steel and absorbs resources. We have the 3 refineries which produce no refined product and absorb resources. We have the new international terminal in Lagos, $500 million borrowed from the Chinese, and international flights are not using that terminal. It's a dead asset. And so many assets at the federal government level, in some cases the state level, are not only producing no return for the country, but they're producing a negative return. They're absorbing resources. I have to believe, I've worked a little bit in the steel industry early in my career, because of course Canada does have some steel production. I have to believe that any steel plant built in the 1970s not producing steel actually has a value of 0 at this stage. So yet we continue to pour resources into it. And of course, then we have the debt assets in the real estate sector, as Dr. Cowley said, because we have some challenges around the Land Use Act, around the mortgage market, around titling. We're not getting the impulse out of real estate that we should. That said, I think the government, prior to the handover to the change in administration, did a very important thing. They established MAFI, which is the Minister of Finance Investments, which is the arm that's supposed to look after all the national assets, federal government assets. And I think they've established a very good team there, private sector-led board, very strong MDA, and they're there because they're trying to maximize the value out of these dead assets. So I hope to see some improvement on it, but that's a key part of the economic program for the new president, His Excellency, is getting some value out of dead assets. And even a starting point is not to continue to put resources in dead assets and make some decisions around which dead assets need to be abandoned.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew Nevin. Let me go to the Chief Economist over at Coronation Merchant Bank, Chinwe Egwim. Chinwe, the IMF, the World Bank continually talk about the tailwinds of demographic dividends in the context of, I guess, the Asian nations and so on. Chinwe, can you speak to the dividends of demography within the Nigerian context? as far as what those dividends would be?
Thanks, Rufus. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll try to paint some context before I now dive into Nigeria. But yeah, like demographic dividends are economic benefits of a country's, age structure, especially when there is a large working age population relative to the dependents, right? And dependents being children and the elderly. And these benefits can be realized through increased productivity, labor supply, savings, which all positively impacts economic growth and development. Now, regarding Nigeria, the potential dividends of demography have not been materialized, in my opinion. There are huge gaps which require a delicate and pragmatic approach to tackle. So the latest labor force data that's available in the public domain show that about 116 million Nigerians were within the labor force age bracket in 2020, so about 3 years ago. But over half of Nigeria's working population are unemployed. The unemployment rate is definitely above 33%. To enjoy the benefits of demographic dividend, a multifaceted approach that addresses specific challenges and assists with untapping hidden opportunities within the country is essential. The government should prioritize investments in human capital development, so education and skill acquisition programs. This will definitely support the country's medium to long-term development plans. And, when I say investing in education, really strengthening the education system at all levels. And I think also the blue collar industry is very important. And I think it's a space that's heavily neglected in Nigeria. So vocational training should really be placed on the front burner. Aligning curricula in schools with the current economic realities, that's important as well. And of course, prioritizing youth empowerment initiatives. Now, job creation has featured as a cornerstone of economic policies among different administrations. But efforts have had very minimal impact, as we can see. In the short to medium term, policy options could focus on supporting sectors with a very high labor capacity, or sectors that have demonstrated high employment multiplier effects, such as manufacturing, construction, trade, and also agriculture. Something worth highlighting before I hand over to you is that the current economic conditions have heightened the Japai trend, which was mentioned earlier by it was mentioned earlier. I can't remember who mentioned it, but I did hear it earlier.
Yeah, Ugo. Yeah, it was Ugo during his presentation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it was during his presentation. Yeah, Ugo mentioned it. Yeah. On the flip side, this is opening up opportunities for growth as corporate roles are being abandoned by those who are relocating. However, there are significant effects of the Japa syndrome on businesses. The impact of the outflow of professionals in key sectors such as health, technology, education, financial services, and agriculture has been reflective in the underperformance of some of these sectors due to a reduction in the number of professionals with technical know-how. Furthermore, with skilled professionals leaving various companies, there is an increased cost for businesses to hire new staff or train current staff. Meanwhile, employees that remain are expected to step up quickly by taking on responsibilities of those that have exited. Therefore, spiking the risk of operational errors. So I thought that was worth mentioning before handing over to you.
Thank you for mentioning that. Very, very informative. We appreciate you for that breakdown there, Chinwe. Ugo, did you? Okay, let me come back to Dr. Khalid on technology. This is our final question here on core strengths before we go into the always interesting GDP, gross domestic product, for our second session. But Dr. Khalid, technology, with respect to these key advantages that yourself, Andrew Nevin, Chinwe Egwim have all talked about, can we, and that's Nigeria, leverage on technological advancements, digital trends, and so on to support all these key strengths that you three have mentioned earlier, Dr. Kali? I think your mic is on mute.
Like I said, absolutely. I think a lot of the things that Nigeria needs to do to fix a lot of these challenges lies in technology development, whether it's expanding the tax net, whether it's fighting corruption, improving public expenditure, virtually almost everything, whether it's deepening financial inclusion. I think technology is the way to go. And I don't even think that, I think there's still huge, significant growth for the technology sector. I don't even think we have cracked the surface as far as Nigeria is concerned. For example, in terms of integration of data and voice into payment and transactions or payment service banks, or with respect to the Universal Service Provision Act, which can help raise the number of base transceiver stations in areas where traditional market conditions do not meet, or as a tool to increase coverage and bring more people into modern day telecommunication services. I think India, for example, is a very good example of the potential the ICT services sector holds. That is assuming that government can commit to backwardly integrating production of pipes, broadband Ethernet cables, accessories, and so on, so as to reduce the cost of production of pipe laying per kilometer. I think if government invests or focuses in the development of data centers and ensure that beneficial ownership is kept within Nigeria just for national security purposes, if government builds global value chains that employs, by doing that anyway, government is able to will be able to build global value chains that employ thousands of young people in the job market on a yearly basis. It also be able to pay more tax to government. It also contribute to consumer spending. So I think technology is actually and there's a reason why the technology sector is actually the sector that has been driving growth, even within the services sector since 2015. But like I said, I don't think we have cracked the surface. I think there's huge opportunity for development, for growth in that sector. And I think it's probably the biggest, is the biggest area in terms of our ability to continue to grow more quicker than we are already doing, and to solve many of the challenges that we have in all the different categories of the economy.
Dr. Kali, thank you for that. I just want to follow up because yes, and thanks for mentioning growth. I think it was 7.9 trillion or so in 2016. It's about 16 or 17 trillion or so in 2022. You're saying, okay, and you just said we haven't scratched the surface. So by that, you probably mean there's room for further growth. I mean, what would it need to key into to boost that growth? Because I think broadband penetration, according to the NCC, I think it's 48% or so. I know the new administration wants to get that to 95 or 96 by 2025. But what do you see? What is it? Is it internet penetration? Is it what do we need to turbocharge the ICT sector, Dr. Kali? What else needs to be done there?
Well, like I said, I used India, the city of Hyderabad, I think that's what it's called. And I use that as an example of what can be built. Like I said, backward integrating for production of pipe. It's broadband penetration. It's also
okay, I think we may have I saw his finger going across the screen. So I think Dr. Kali may have pushed the button and ejected himself by accident from the panel. So I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure he'll be back because his finger was going over the screen, and then maybe he was trying to end the call. Sometimes people will be calling you when you're on these panels, and then you try to end the call, and then you hit exit, and then there's the leave button. See, everybody can see the leave button at the bottom right. All right, Andrew Nevin, let me have you jump in. I'm sure Dr. Kali will come in at some point. You're also a big tech advocate. So can you just quickly pick on, I guess, where he left off, Andrew Nevin, on the potential for the ICT sector within as a subsector?
Right. Well, Right. Thanks, Rodas. I mean, we put out the papers last year, which said, look, the actually biggest way to increase Nigerian exports is by putting Nigerians into global value chains, services on that. And all of the trends that Dr. Kelly highlighted are exactly there. And particularly with COVID, we realized much more can be done remotely than could be done before. And he was talking about Hyderabad. I was recently in Bangalore in India. They have 2 million ICT workers in Bangalore. And I can tell you, it's a very prosperous place. So in our paper, we talked about young Nigerians joining global value chains remotely. So they're doing things like software development, like animation, like call centers, like BPO outsourcing, but also doing things like legal work, accounting work, which changed the way PwC and KPMG work. And it's already happening. I mean, you know, people know I talk all the time about our national heroine, Amal Hassan. I mean, she's the founder of Global Outsource. She has, I think, getting close to 2,000 people in Kaduna and Abuja, which serve global companies in all of the fields that I just mentioned on that. I mean, we need 100 Amal Hassan. She's now expanding to Gombe, which is a very important point that people need to understand. Is one reason the strategy is so important to the country is it could be done everywhere on it. I mean, we can't have a situation where Lagos continues to groan under the infrastructure challenges. People feel like they need to go to Lagos to get a good job. So if you look at Edo State, for example, His Excellency Governor Obaseki, clearly on this strategy, he's aiming for 35,000 software developers. He started down that program. He's already inserting software developers into global value chains. So in our paper, we put out the number 2 million Nigerians inserted into global value chains. And of course, if you have 2 million Nigerians earning FX, you quickly solve the balance of payment problem. You quickly solve a lot of our economic challenges because, of course, when they earn those wages, just like, or salaries, just like what I saw in Bangalore, they go out and buy things. They buy a home for their parents. They buy a car. They go out and party. Bangalore is a big pub culture. The pubs were all full of young people when I was there in December. So that for us is the best way to really drive exports quickly. And one of the reasons we can do it is, of course, we don't have to worry about the physical ports infrastructure. We don't have to worry about the road infrastructure. We don't have to worry about the electricity infrastructure because these jobs they take some electricity, but can be delivered by solar. But as Dr. Kelly said, it also needs some support from the government, particularly about creating this enabling environment we always talk about. There are 40 different taxes and levies that are applied to the telecommunications industry, multiple MDAs, multiple taxation. And of course, President Tinubu talked about it in his inaugural address. And so if we want to get those 2 million remote jobs, and 2 million to me is a low number in 10 or 12 years, as we put in our paper, because there's 28 million software developers in the world going to 45 million. Whether there's AI or not, there's always going to be people involved in driving the IT industry on that. And we are a significant share of the young people in the global economy and should have a big share of those jobs. So I'm absolutely with Dr. Kelly in terms of driving our exports and also the domestic use of technology, improving the tax net, reducing corruption, improving our own services, for example, in financial services, and many other ways that technology is used in this country to leapfrog things that are done elsewhere in a different way is all there for the taking. So I'd really like to see the new, and he said it in his speech, of course, President Tinubu put in, he said, we put out 2 million jobs and I think in 10 to 12 years or 10 to 15 years, he put out 1 million digital jobs, I think in his first administration. So he's even more ambitious than PwC in going down this path.
Thank you, Andrew Nevin. We have Dr. Kali back. Well, right before I get back to Dr. Kali, it would be a crime on my part to mention ICT and not have Razak Ahmed, CEO and co-founder of Cowrywise, not to chip in on ICT. And I know Razak is for the third and fourth session with Ubedre, but I'm switching up the rules here. Let me just pull you in. Razak, please give us your thoughts on ICT. You're a player in that sector. How do you see that sector for the economy?
Yeah, thank you, Rotus. It's my pleasure being here. I think Dr. Kale and Andrew and Chinwe mentioned a couple of points that are very vital. What I would just add to the point they've mentioned with respect to ICT, especially when it comes to how advancement in ICT can enable us unlock additional growth opportunities, is largely on the basis of the attributes that information technology has generally. And given our demographic structure, landmass, we are, based on some sources, above 200 million people in the country. By any standard in the world, that's a very big country. And in terms of landmass as well, it's a very expansive landmass that we have as a country. So everything about Nigeria is about scale, right? So what technology enables us to do is when technology is deployed to solving key problems, say, for example, revenue drive, or solving the problems in port, or solving the problem of securities, what technology enables is largely deploying the solution at scale at an effective rate. And that's a fundamental attribute that technology can enable when it comes to solving some of these problems. If a very small country, for example, we can do some of these things manually, we can do some of these things with brick and mortar, but given the dire situations that we face right now as a country, we need to solve problems very quickly because some of these problems have been on for a very long time. So we need speed, we need efficiency, and we need solutions that work with some level of precision. And that is what technology can enable you to do. With a click of a button, for example, you can widen the net of your taxable base, right? If technology is deployed towards tax mobilization. With a flip of technology, you can widen the base of your identity management system in the country if technology is deployed to do that, right? And given the population base, we can benefit a whole lot from rapid scaling. The speed of doing that is very, very advantageous, and that is what technology can unlock. And the precision of that as well. And more importantly, some of the loopholes that are engendered by a lot of human interventions and the inefficiencies that creep in when humans are largely involved in operations, especially when it comes to governments, can easily be sidetracked if technology is deployed. So all these things might look micro in nature, but on their aggregate, they can unlock significant value for the country at a GDP level. So in terms of technology deployment, I think those are the key areas that I believe strongly technology can enable us to: speed of execution, scale, and significant efficiency benefits that comes from them.
Thank you so much, Razak. Again, Nairametrics economic outlook here on harnessing, the opportunities for development. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat. I know also the Q&A box. If you also want to send in your questions, you can also throw them into the Q&A. All our panelists being praised here for their very insightful comments from this webinar brought to us by Nairametrics. Now, Dr. Kali, let me come back to you. I want you, again, when you were with the Bureau of Statistics, we would all look forward to your Twitter threads where you go down by sector, by subsector of the economy, telling us which grew and contracted. Dr. Kali, which sectors, in your view, are underperforming? And what can be done to boost those? Now we're officially in section 2 now. We're looking at GDP now. We started with ICT, but I want to pick the brains of the panelists on the subsectors of the economy. So Dr. Kali, what subsectors are underperforming? Look at first quarter of this year, agriculture contracted. I was reading with the report from Nairametrics. So what are your thoughts on underperforming subsectors?
I would say that it's easier to pick the sectors that are actually not underperforming. There are fewer of them. Most of the sectors are underperforming. One of the ones you mentioned, agriculture. Although the reason why agriculture contracted the first quarter, this is the first time agriculture has contracted since 1982, I think. And I think that was largely tied to the Naira redesign policy. But apart from that, agriculture has always grown. But even though that growth in agriculture is really understated, like I mentioned at the beginning of this session, agriculture is growing, that's fine, but it's largely just small scale subsistence based on nature type agriculture. Now you can imagine if we are growing 2-3% using traditional methods of production, you can imagine if we scale up mechanization using more improved seeds, we get these smallholder farmers to work and expand agricultural production. So even though agriculture has been growing and for the most part has been responsible for holding the Nigerian economy, I think it's still underperforming. If you look at industry in particular manufacturing, you see that only 2, or should I say 3 subsectors in manufacturing account for about 70% of manufacturing growth. That's food and beverage, cement, and textiles. And even in this, just 3 of them account for 70%. Then you have another 9 or so that are accounting for those 30%, base metals, and these things are paints and so on. These things are extremely important, but they are growing 1%. They are accounting for less than 1% of our GDP. So you have situations like that. Even if you go into the sector, even the services, insurance, for example, is significantly underperforming. You look at sectors like
mining. What about mining?
Mining, yes, that's mining as well. Mining is significantly underperforming. Now, if you get, so like I said, if you look at almost every economic activity of the 46, you find that probably about 40 of them are underperforming, and most of the reasons are due to, you find that the sectors that are performing and the ones that are underperforming, there's a direct correlation with the ones that government has too much of its hand in. And I think that's when the sectors that are left, predominantly the private sectors, tend to be performing closer to their capacity. So I think almost every economic activity in Nigeria is underperforming, and that is why we are not able to grow anywhere close to our potential, our real potential growth, which should be in double digits.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, speaking of growth, the president did say in his inauguration speech, minimum 6% is what he wants to see. Minimum, so key distinction there. Dr. Kale, thank you. Chinwe, let me bring you in here, and I do want to also have you weigh in on these underperforming subsectors. Chinwe, are they not important for economic growth? And what are your thoughts? How can we, following up on what Dr. Kale said, how do you think we can get these subsectors growing again and contributing more?
They're definitely important, and so subsectors would be segments under the main sectors. And maybe just to highlight, like a sector like agriculture, which has crop production as a subsector, that has accounted for over 90% of that sector for the longest time, at least since I started tracking the national accounts. Manufacturing, where you have food and beverages, you have cement, you have the industry that covers like the fashion. All those subsectors are very important. But from a statistics perspective, two sectors, agriculture and oil and gas, which did post contractions in the first quarter of this year, of course, are seen as underperforming, but they remain critical to boost overall economic growth. And I am glad that they've been highlighted or included to the priority sectors by the current administration. And I do look forward to seeing how they would implement policies that would unlock growth potentials within these sectors. Now, regarding your question around a turnaround or achieving a turnaround, for the oil and gas sector, the requirements are not far-fetched. You have things like improving security to tackle theft and vandalism, while promoting the development of local content and capabilities within the sector. Others include, let's say, investing in critical infrastructure such as transportation networks, pipelines, refineries, and storage facilities that would ensure efficient production, transportation, and distribution. Now, for agriculture, I'll say that tackling insecurity, especially in the food producing areas, is very important. Enhancing rural infrastructure, which includes transport networks, irrigation systems, storage facilities, and market access. Now, improved infrastructure can reduce post-harvest losses, can facilitate efficient movement of agricultural products, and connect farmers to markets. We've been saying this. Like, if you read publications that come out from experts, you'd see these things I'm saying repeatedly. Improving access to finance and facilitating access to information and extension services that would enable farmers to make informed decisions and improve productivity is also important. Generally creating an enabling environment that supports agricultural development, let's say by introducing land tenure systems or reforms, well-targeted and properly monitored initiatives or interventions, sorry, not initiatives, well-monitored interventions and also encouraging incentives for increased private sector investments is also important. Finally, let me also add that promoting gender equality and empowering female farmers through targeted interventions is critical to boosting growth in the agriculture sector as well. So I approached your question by answering with focus on two sectors.
Thank you very much. And yes, the closing that gender gap is very important, Chinwe. Thank you for that. Dr. Akiumi Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, he did say there's like a 42 billion naira, or is it dollar gap? No, it's dollars gap between financing between male and female SMEs. Thank you for that. Andrew Nevin, I do want to follow up with you on one more thing, because I think we're coming up on our third section in just a moment. Since we're talking subsectors, and Andrew Nevin, you've always praised Nollywood, you've praised our performance in music, you've praised sports, you know, the Greek Freak overseas, so for the Milwaukee Bucks, our Premier League and players in the Serie A and Nollywood. But Andrew Nevin, we want to talk, they're all doing well overseas. So, you know, the Greek Freak, he's earning money in the NBA. You've got our Premier League players earning money overseas. If you talk about how they can benefit us here, like Nollywood, this weekend, I think the #1 movie in the US box office, they bring in millions of dollars. How do we translate that to here? The music stars, your Temis, and I saw Remy, or what's his name, over in India the other day. They're all earning money overseas. I mean, how do we translate that to here in Nigeria? Because when you look at the portion of GDP contributions, they're really low. Sports, I mean, yes, our players are doing well overseas in the NBA and the Premier League, but what about our local sports leagues here? I mean, we saw that viral video of heavy rain causing a portion of the stadium in Lagos to collapse. So, Andrew Nevin, how do we get that translated down here as far as those subsectors in entertainment, music, sports, and so on are concerned?
Well, I mean, obviously, I use these examples to show that when you put Nigerians in the global value chains, you know, they earn global wages, whether they're superstars or whether they're doing business processing outsourcing. And of course, you know, I have 2 million people that want to go into global value chains. They're not all superstars. I mean, they're each a little bit different. I mean, if you take football, for example, I mean, we have a long way to go to develop the local league. But in Brazil, I think the transfer fees are about the third or fourth source of FX for Brazil, in fact. And we should be in the same way in football if we developed it locally. I don't think we'll reproduce another Yanastad and the Combo. That's a kind of once in a century kind of thing. But, you know, obviously the Nollywood, I mean, the Nollywood movies are produced in Nigeria, right? So to the extent that we get local watching of it, we have all the time, intellectual property things worked out, you know, we are exporting that. I mean, Bollywood's done very well. It earns money for India. So each case is a little bit different, but you know, I use those examples just to show how successful Nigerians can be in these global value chains. Some global value chains, if you stay in Nigeria and are working a global value chain, you're going to bring more value to Nigeria than if you're Alexa Iwobi and you have to go over to Liverpool to be able to deliver that value. But I'd like to see Nigerians inserted in global value chains in every field. And of course, one of the things it will help raise wages here. So if you go to the situation we have with the skill level, if someone can now work for Microsoft or can work remotely earning a global wage as a software developer, then when you're Access Bank or Zenith Bank or Sterling Bank and you want to develop your software platforms internally, you're going to have to pay a higher price to get those skill levels. So by putting these people in the global value chains, it's going to raise up the whole situation here. And also the other point about these global value chains is you know, there are many young Nigerians inserting themselves in global value chains on their own. You know, no help from the government, no path to it. They just figure it out. I'll give you one example. I came across a young man in Kano who, as an individual, managed to work on AI issues for a Canadian telecommunications company. So he's getting paid in US dollars. He's buying his parents a house, you know, he's got a comfortable life. And this is happening at scale. And of course, every time you hear about one of these stories as a young Nigerian, you realize maybe I can do that too if I learn the right skills to go into these global value chains. So that's one reason that we're so insistent on this, because it doesn't take the government policy. I mean, there's a few things the government can do to support it. What it takes is millions of individuals on their own figuring out, you know, what they can do to insert, and they're highly incentivized to do it. And I had one estimate, which I haven't published because I don't have the facts, but one estimate there are actually 300,000 Nigerians in Nigeria working global value chains. If that is true, that's absolutely fantastic. We're well on our way to 2 million, but whether it's 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000, we've actually started down this path and the progress is enormous. But I always use the example of the superstars because it gets people thinking about what's the value of a Nigerian. I mean, someone who has a university degree in Nigeria ends up as a security guard is earning 50,000 naira a month, 40,000 naira a month. I mean, $50 US. That same individual with a university degree, you then get some extra training to be able to join a call center, be in a BPO, is suddenly earning 20 times that, 50 times that. And that's the value creation that we're really trying to stress from PwC as you point.
Excellent stuff, Andrew Nevin. Thank you so much. Okay, and that brings us to, I guess, the end of our first two sessions. One, of course, on the key advantages and that Nigeria can turbocharge and take advantage of globally and regionally in the African continent. And then, of course, the gross domestic product, the subsectors. So thank you so much to the panelists there for weighing in. I guess I'll hand over, back to Joanna.
Right. Thank you so much, Reuters, for moderating the first and the second section. It's been quite some insight as to, where our economy is and the potentials for our economy when it comes to land, when it comes to labor. We've had our panelists give us some insights as regards that. And I think it was quite interesting when Andrew Nevin mentioned that the thriving sectors are the ones that are self-organized, that the government doesn't have anything to do with. But hopefully we see the government policies and regulations that do favor these other economies that need help, obviously, and need fixes. Other sectors that need fixes. Of course, in case you're just tuning in, you have missed quite a bit, but you can always catch up. This session will be posted on YouTube, I believe. And if you have questions, feel free to drop them in just a moment. I'm sure we'll get round to answering your questions after the third and the fourth section. Just a quick interlude from our sponsors. Of course, this economic outlook is brought to you by Nairametrics, but sponsored by Quackle. Quackle, they are is a global multi-asset broker, creating new opportunities in the financial markets and the global audience. Wherever they are helping the people create. Wherever their clients are, they're helping people create the future that they deserve. They provide simple, secure, and superior trading experience and services with transparency and innovative technology. There are more details on the screen. I'm sure you can, sit there and run through the brochure. Other things you may want to know, Quackle, they are unique and they provide unique and innovative ways to connect their clients, to connect you with the most suitable traders to copy. A Quackle investment lets you access the opportunities of trading without any advanced technical skill. So you might want to get into that and get more information on it. Their website, www.quacklemarkets.com, and of course across social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, Quackle_markets on Instagram. So you might want to check that out. But of course, the session continues, and like I said, keep dropping your comments and your questions as well. I'll be handing over right about now to Ugodre himself, the founder of Nairametrics, of course, who will be leading the discussions of the third and the fourth panel. We're talking policy expectations. We've talked about policy and how perhaps it's stifling some of these other sectors. So it'll be interesting to see some of the policies that need to come to play to enable the growth in these sectors. So that's the third session. And of course, the fourth section, which will focus on opportunities recap across sectors. So I'm handing over to Ugodre now.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you so much. My God, I've learned so much already over the last hour or so from our of course, exciting panelists. Guys, one thing as Dr. Nevin was just talking, and Chinwe, and of course was Zach and Dr. Kala, I was just saying to myself, I kind of have a way of supporting, sports clubs that have a lot of Nigerians, So for those who know me very well, I'm a big Miami Heat fan, and in Miami Heat, Dr. Andrew Nevin, we do have Gabe Vincent and Bama Debayo as well, and of course, the best football club in the world, Arsenal, does have Bukayo Saka Bukayo Saka as well. So, I mean, I think you guys got to also find a way of supporting, Nigerians wherever they are. You know what I mean? And stop supporting clubs that don't have Nigerians. Anyway, on a lighter note, this section we're going to be basically looking at some of the policy outlines that the economic outlines, especially that the Tinubu administration wants to focus on. He had said that he's going to have 5 focus areas, even though he also mentioned that they're going to give us details. But just running across them: public finances, infrastructure and security programs, human capital, public sector reforms, and of course, the economy. And those are just the 5 key areas he wants to focus on. So we will talk about policy expectation that should help to charge economic growth, just as Joanna did mention. And I'm going to come to you. By the way, we have Dr. Muda Yusuf as well, who has just joined. Dr. Muda, are you here? Mic check.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, fantastic, sir. Welcome, welcome. Good to have you on this second section. All right, so we'll go straight. Andrew Nevin, I'm going to come straight to you. So looking through the policy focus areas, that I have just mentioned, which one excites you and why? I mean, public finances, is it infrastructure and security reforms? Is it human capital? Is it public sector reforms? Or is it, what they want to do in the economy in general? Which one excites you?
Well, I think, we've been clear in the last year or so that the number one economic issue is insecurity. And, I'm not a security expert, so I don't have any recommendations other than to say that we're very happy to see the focus on. So I think that has to be the starting point. I think His Excellency the President has been very clear on that in his statements to date. And of course, I think he came out yesterday, or the day before, but reported yesterday that in terms of oil production, because the number 2 issue for us has been this drop in oil production. And people ask why there's inflation. There's inflation because the drop in oil production has depressed the Naira, right? Because we essentially have a balance of payments crisis. And then we look at the Ukraine war. Nigeria should have been a beneficiary of the Ukraine war if we were producing 1.8 million barrels a day, 1.9 million barrels a day. And of course, in fact, it's been a disaster for us because we allowed production to go down to 1.0. And because of the foil subsidy, we in effect have no benefit from, we have a negative from an increase in oil prices. And I'm not sure if everyone is aware on this call, there's been no transfer from NNPC to the Federation account in 2022 and no transfer in 2023. So the second urgent thing after insecurity is getting hydrocarbon production back up on that. That's an immediate thing. And I think His Excellency the President came out and was in the press yesterday that he's very focused on getting that hydrocarbon production back up. So let's start with those 2 things. Of course, the foil subsidies make a decision about, and of course, we've also been over the years, for the past decade, very clear we need a unified exchange rate. So those are, you asked for one, those are 4 big economic areas that I think we're already seeing progress with the new administration.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Still sticking to you. Let's just focus a bit on public finances, and some of the things that the president has said that he will do is remove fuel subsidy. He's also talked about reforms, across resource allocation, and so that at least states can be more independent. There's also, talk around taxation, particularly widening the tax net, foreign debt as well, how they're going to fix it, securitization of government assets, and of course, which also dovetails to the debt capital that you did mention, and then CBN ways and means. But let's just even home in on the one decision that he's taken already, which is fuel subsidy removal. How does this affect Nigeria positively? I mean, I think that everybody knows how it affects Nigeria negatively. You've already seen what that means for it to fill a tank now. A 100-liter tank will probably cost you between 50 to 60,000 naira. 50-liter tank will probably cost you 30,000 naira. So that has immediate impact on transportation costs and of course inflation. I think I did see a tweet from Dr. Kale saying that inflation could, jack up to about 30% or so because of subsidy removal. But there are positives. So could you just maybe, give us a little bit of insight into how this provides some sort of positive booster for the economy?
Thanks, Hugo. So, let's be very clear about it. The NNPC is spending at least 400 billion a month on the foil subsidy, and they're not remitting anything to the Federation account. So to get a foil subsidy for you in Lagos, middle class, upper middle class people in Lagos filling up their cars, the governor in Sokoto can't pay pensions to his pensioners. That's the benefit to the country. I mean, the reality, we all know this foil subsidy is a form of corruption. We all know this foil subsidy is draining out of the country, and we all know that the benefit, to the extent it stays in Nigeria, is to the people that own cars and the middle class and upper middle class. The people that are losing on it, as I said, are the pensioners in states, the state employees. They can't pay their minimum wages. They're behind on that. So when you ask what's the benefit, that group's going to benefit immediately on that by the removal of the foil subsidy. And of course, we've been vociferous over the years that the foil subsidy has to be removed. We've seen for a couple of years it was definitely on the way out, and we were very happy to see the president take this bold decision.
All right, thank you so much for that, Andrew. I'm going to segue right to you, Dr. Kale. Mic check. I hope you're still here. Do I see you? Dr. Kale? Got a question for you. Maybe let me just start with your own impression as well. What do you think about these 5 focus areas? Do you think that, maybe he got it right, or is there something that he's missing? Again, just to recap, he wants to focus on public finances, infrastructure and security, human capital, public sector reforms, and then the economy.
I think he got, in terms of what is most urgent, he got them right, especially things that are to be completed within 4 years. To me, I'm more excited about public sector reforms and public finances. And public sector reform, they're not just, it's not just the usual rationalize the public sector, the Orosari report and so on, but from the perspective of the capacity of the public servants themselves. No matter how good his ideas and no matter what he wants to implement, it's going to be implemented by the public service. And if the public service does not have the capacity to do it, or the interest in doing it, then nothing's going to be done. That's what you find. That's what you have found in many other administrations where you have very competent and very knowledgeable ministers and heads of MDAs. Very little is done, and it has to do with changing, either because the capacity doesn't exist, and more because the interest to change things just doesn't exist. You have a situation where you cannot get rid of public servants. They can really just do whatever they want, and it's difficult to get rid of them. And if you succeed in getting rid of them, as soon as you go, they could get back into the system. So until such things are also fixed, when you get the public service to build their capacity and their mindset in terms of wanting these things to work, I don't think that no matter how good or credible people are talking about round pegs in round holes, that's all fantastic and needed, but at the end of the day, it's not those round pegs in the round holes that are going to actually push the reforms, actually the public service, right? So looking at those kind of things, I think are extremely important, and a lot of people are not focusing on that, but focusing on the brilliant minds that are going to come in, the strength of the president. He's not the one going to push, actually going to implement all these things. In terms of public finance, again, I'm one of the few people that does not believe in increasing taxes. I know you mentioned that it's most likely going to push up taxes. I'm not one of the people that believe that, and I think you're right, but I'm not one of the people that is a fan of pushing up taxes, particularly in a recession or when the economy is actually struggling with fragile growth, because I think at the end of the day, all you do is, particularly in Nigeria's economic model, where household consumption, expenditure, and private investment are the 2 largest contributors of share of our GDP. Now, when you increase taxes, you squeeze in household consumption expenditure, and you're also squeezing the earnings of businesses, thereby squeezing business expansion and so on. So, let me give you an example. Let me explain what happened in the last few years, in the last 8 years, using the government's model. The government model was public sector driven. So they expanded government expenditure, they expanded government investment. That's why you have so much infrastructure development. But they didn't expand government investment and consumption because the economy was expanding and they were getting more revenue. They did that in 2 ways. One was to tax consumers and businesses that were not growing. So you squeeze consumption expenditure and squeeze the ability of private investment to grow. And at the same time, they expanded the economy by debt. And then to repay the debt, again, you go and squeeze consumption expenditure. So you increased public expenditure by 30%. You increased public investment by about 30% as well. But in the process, you squeezed household consumption, which contracted. by about 3%. You squeezed private investment, which was just more or less flat. So by doing that, your growth really was just very fragile and small. So I'm not, and that's because the economy was not growing significant. So I'm not a fan of increasing taxes. I prefer harmonizing the multiple taxes that are out there. I'm a bigger fan of more efficient public sector expenditure. For example, like Andrew said, getting rid of the wasteful expenditure, like the fuel subsidies. When you look at the revenue generating agencies, you find that as their revenues go up, they just find things to spend more. They just increase their expenditure. I remember once when I was still in government that, and I found that one of the revenue agencies, even though they had about 800 staff to my 6,000, their office supplies was higher than my entire budget. So when you have these kinds of, I think that's where the target should be: harmonize the taxes, expand the tax net using technology, and then more efficient expenditure, more expedient expenditure structure. I think that's so that's why I'm excited, because if we're able to do this in terms of public finance, if we're able to reform the public sector, I think that's when every other thing actually ties in properly, and we might actually see some significant growth. But to answer your question again, I think the president got it right. Those are the key issues those are key issues that are affecting Nigeria, and more importantly, they are the key issues that actually he can do something about, at least in the first 4 years.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khaled. This actually resonates very well with me, because I think one thing that you said here that actually struck me was how important civil service reforms is to economic growth. I mean, you can have the best technocrats out there, but if you don't have civil service that is equipped enough to actually help drive private sector economic growth, then you're not going to see any growth at all. And of course, in terms of taxes, I mean, maybe they can expand the tax net, but increasing taxes is something that we also don't favor. Indeed, in this Nigeria, if you all know, if you wake up today and say you want to go and be a good taxpayer and you go and start paying your taxes, trust me, in the next few months, they're going to send a 10 tax audit to you. So the government also doesn't actually reward people who actually want to pay taxes. Rather, it appears they even come back and want to tax them more, rather than look for people who are actually not paying taxes. And those are some of the conundrums that we have. Dr. Muda, are you here? Could you just turn on your camera, Dr. Muda?
Yes, I'm here.
Right, fantastic. All right. So he unfortunately can't join us. So I'm going to push one or two of his questions to you as well as to Razak. But this one to you first. The government also talked about tackling infrastructure and security as one of those things on its agenda. How would this translate to economic growth if he's able to fix some of the infrastructure deficit that we have today, and also tackle insecurity, which the Buhari government did try to tackle, but weren't very successful? How would this aid economic growth in general, Dr. Muda?
Yeah, definitely it will impact positively on economic growth, because the risk of investment, is related or correlated to, the risk that you have in the environment. The insecurity, for instance, has affected some major segments of the economy. Agric accounts for about 23-24% of our GDP. We know the impact of insecurity on agriculture. It has practically crippled the agricultural sector. The sector could do much better. We know the implications of that for food inflation. And we know the implication of inflation for poverty. Then again, about the perception of the country as an investment destination. Perception matters a great deal, but it's not all the time that perception also reflects reality. But anybody watching Nigeria from afar, with all the stories that hit the headlines about Boko Haram, 50 people killed, terrorism, and all of that, I mean, that is enough to scare investors. And what you have ultimately is that you have investors that have extremely high risk appetite. Those with average risk appetite, they just run away. They can't even stand that kind of economy. That is why what you find around here are mostly Asian investors and all of that, whose risk appetite is extremely very high. So if we have a much better environment as far as security is concerned, we'll be able to attract a lot more investors, especially from the West. They don't have that kind of risk appetite. Then, of course, you see how much of our budget that the defense is gobbling. Yes, it's good to have a very good defense budget, but again, we have deprived quite a number of sectors of very valuable resources because of this insecurity, So generally, I think insecurity is a major problem for the economy. It's affecting the capacity of the economy to grow. It's making it difficult for us to attract investment, and not just about insecurity in terms of killings and all of that. Issues of oil theft and the insecurity in the oil producing area. It has done a lot of damage to the economy. Dr. Nevin just talked about what the NNPC GMD said. You are losing about 400 billion naira every month to oil theft. And this has been going on for close to a decade. It's only recently that the government woke up and started to take some very concrete actions. We hope that will be sustained. And you know how many valuable investors we have lost in that sector. Practically most of the oil majors have left the sector. And these are the companies that have the capacity, they have the muscle to actually make a difference in terms of investment in the sector. And we know the impact of that on our revenue. We know the impact of that on our foreign exchange. We know the impact of that on our
Okay, I think we lost
our foreign reserves. So in many ways, insecurity has a lot of impact on it. We'll address this. We'll address this much better, to it going forward.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Muda. Chinwe, I'm going to come to you. Razak, of course, I'm coming to you in a bit, but let me come to Chinwe. Chinwe, a lot of us who are, economic proponents in this country, when we heard, the speech, inaugural speech by the president, I think we're like, a lot of us threw our fist in the air, like, yes, finally. Looks like we're getting what we want. We heard him talk about unifying the exchange rate. We heard him say, look, I want subsidy removal out. Kind of like we're looking at a market-driven economy. So it'll be interesting to know what your thoughts are on his economic agenda, at least from what we've heard. I do know that there's not a lot of details out yet, but in terms of the thought process and where the president is going, what is your thought around this? And what else can he do, or would you suggest if they come to you that they can actually do to attract foreign investment? You heard Dr. Muda Yusuf. You also heard, Andrew Nevin, also Khaled. We do need foreign investment in this country, if for anything, to achieve the sort of forex stability that we're looking for. So, Chinwe, your response.
Thanks for that question. I think I'm able to provide a robust response because my view is not solely on the back of what the president said. There have been a lot of, what shall I call them, private forums that we've been able to attend. So we kind of get a sense of where their head is at to an extent. But yeah, the new administration intends to achieve an average double-digit GDP growth during its tenure, be it 4 or 8 years. Priority sectors have been highlighted, and these sectors are supposed to be the vehicles that would help to achieve this target. And I think they include agriculture, manufacturing, oil and gas, technology, there's real estate, transportation, and power. And collectively, if I look into or do some analysis using the Q1 GDP figures, collectively, these sectors account for about 62% of total GDP. That is for the first quarter of this year. Now, an expansionary fiscal policy posture was adopted in the last administration, and I expect to see the same in the BAT administration. There seems to be a preference towards using fiscal policy to achieve various economic goals, as opposed to just relying solely on monetary policy. Now, from a revenue perspective, this is fiscal I'm talking about. From a revenue perspective, revenue underperformance has been steadily observed, and this has impacted the country's debt to revenue ratio. The PMS subsidy removal, which is top of mind right now, should support revenue performance. I understand that about 2 trillion Naira was spent on PMS subsidy from January to July of 2022. And that was out of a budget of 4 trillion Naira for the full year of 2022. This is compared to 1.5 trillion Naira that was spent for full year 2021. However, 3.4 trillion was budgeted for subsidy payments for the first half of this year, that's 2023. Now, there is an inflationary impact to the removal. And of course, this has been factored in series of projection analysis and modeling. But pockets and purses will be pinched. Purchasing power will be eroded. That is the reality, at least in the near term. But if this move is done effectively, it will be a positive for the country's fiscal landscape. As for government revenue via taxes, which has come up in the conversation already, I do expect the BAT administration to remain conservative with regards to implementing broad tax increases. But I think there are plans to review the corporate tax system, plug loopholes and enhance collection efficiency by deploying technology and automation as well. The president has indicated willingness to utilize tax credits and tax holidays to boost domestic manufacturing. I think that would be favorable for SMEs, which we all know contributes as high as 50% to total national output. Ratio of capital to recurrent expenditure is expected to be higher from my vantage point. The ratio preference is 30 to 70. I think there will be a slight shift given all the planned projects. Project financing is expected to be in high demand. Some planned infrastructure projects highlighted that I find interesting are the National Potable Water Supply campaign. There is also the reticulation of major dams, development of small-scale irrigation and water catchment systems, as well as rehabilitation of the country's highway system. If you're listening carefully, you see that most of them tilt towards agriculture or improving the agriculture sector. So those are some that I saw that caught my attention. But it is also worth noting that a spike in capital expenditure would impact deficit financing gaps. It definitely would. So I doubt that the FGN's borrowing target will reduce in the near term. We still expect Nigeria to have limited access to the international capital market in 2023. And I could say stretching all the way to the first half of next year as well. We're also remaining focused, on rating actions by credit rating agencies, because this plays a critical role in external borrowing capacity. Now, with regards to monetary policy, for years, the monetary policy approach was largely cautious and policy rate hikes were recorded sparingly. The current contractionary stance is largely on the back of harsh economic conditions. So yeah, you have the elevated inflation figures that are largely driving the movement that we're seeing with the rate hikes. I think collectively this year, we've seen the policy rate hiked by about 200 basis points just this year. But I think something we're sensing for now, of course, these things are subject to change and we keep monitoring, is that the new administration is not fully inclined to the current approach of relying mainly on MPR hikes to combat elevated inflation, given that the factors that affect high inflation are largely supply side driven. I expect to see increased coordination between fiscal and monetary authorities going forward. It's important to note that achieving sustained double-digit growth requires long-term commitment, effective implementation of policies, continuous monitoring and adaptability to changing circumstances. Of course, strong leadership, stakeholder engagement is very important, which I think was a mild, well, not mild, but a key issue with the Naira redesigning policy. So stakeholder engagement is incredibly important. And consensus building, these are all essential for driving the necessary reforms and maintaining momentum towards economic transformation. Now, the second part of your question, I'm concluding. Well, I think the new administration's agenda covers solutions that can tackle the main economic issues. Nigeria has never suffered from a lack of policy issues or policy ideas, sorry. Effective implementation has been the major issue. Let's say, for example, the drive to unify exchange rates and the call for lower interest rates, which is targeted at boosting foreign direct investments, as well as fostering inclusive growth. All of that will require careful engagement with relevant stakeholders, including the central bank and other financial institutions. Other agenda items which are important to boost FDI inflows include enhancing governance, transparency, and accountability across all sectors, strengthening institutions and combating corruptions. These seem to be top of mind for the new administration. So the second part of your question, I don't think they are lacking with regards to what policies or what reforms to put out there or to engage with. I think it really is just that willpower to effectively implement that is key.
All right, thank you so much for that, elaborate overview, Chinwe. I think that I just hope if someone in administration is on this call listening, because you did share a lot of nuggets. If you don't mind, I know we're running out of time, but just kindly recap those again. And I know I took down agri, manufacturing, oil and gas, technology, and then which other sectors again, so that our listener participants can also take note. Which sectors again did you mention, Chinwe?
You mean the priority sectors?
The priority sectors.
Okay, so I said agriculture, manufacturing, oil and gas, technology, real estate, housing, but I call it real estate, transportation, and power.
All right, you had that too. So guys, those are the priority sectors for this current administration. All right, so I'm going to come to you next, my very good friend Razak. In terms of human capital, the government has said they will implement modern curriculum, drive innovation and entrepreneurship, technical and vocational studies, healthcare initiatives. We know how important human capital is to driving economic growth. Any country that does not take human capital serious can't achieve economic growth. I think it was Andrew that used to put it, mention how that is important, particularly from a civil service point of view. So what are your thoughts on the government's human capital agenda, and how will this translate to improve economic growth, specifically from the perspective of building capacity so that we can compete? We know that we're getting into a world now where there is AI, big data analytics, cross-border transactions as well. There is a rush for talent. Like I've always told people, like you're now in a world where talent is so nomadic and ubiquitous. So you can't claim talent is like a commodity, right? So countries are willing to give people citizenship just so that they can have them in, so that they can compete. So how do you think government's plan would help support economic growth locally? And what do you suggest as well, Razak?
Yeah, thank you, Ugo. I think the concept of human capital is quite important, especially when it comes to the growth equation of any country. And more importantly, in this new dispensation, for example, expectation is an important tool of macroeconomic management. So if stakeholders in the human capital sectors actually understand, believe strongly in the expectation of the current administrations, they will take some major economic decisions that are tailored towards achieving that expectation. So most macroeconomic outcomes are largely self-fulfilling prophecy based on the belief of economic agents, right? The current administration actually still needs a very bold statement when it comes to human capital, right? And one thing that is very common as one thing that is true universally is that humans generally have the capacity to improve their well-being through education, right? Through education and skill acquisition. That is a universal truth. It is applicable in Nigeria, it's applicable in the East, it's applicable in the West, right? So the policies of the government to enable people acquire the right education, to enable people acquire the right skill set so they can ultimately contribute towards economic growth matters a whole lot. And one key agenda that this current administration is pushing is unlocking the opportunities in the educational sector, for example, through credits like education loan, which is common in the Western world, right? And how far that will go, I think, is something we'll still need to see the details of, right? And that's one model. There are other nations in the East, for example, that are government-driven in terms of how they've implemented their educational system. That might not be private sector-driven, but education is an important element that can either be private sector-driven or public sector-driven. The most important thing is to have quality education as a basis for empowering the human capital of the country. Then the second thing that matters a whole lot in this age and time is that human capital is portable, right? We've seen people move across the world in terms of in terms of human capital mobility. People can move from Nigeria to UK, and it is not just a unidirectional thing. It's not just Nigerians moving to UK or US or Canada. We also have Indians moving to UK, moving to Indians. We also have people from Eastern extraction moving to the West. So it's a global force that we need to recognize. While it presents some threats right now, primarily because the existing human capital stock that we have find it extremely attractive to move out, I think from the government policy standpoint, it's also an opportunity that human capital is extremely mobile right now globally, which means what policy can the government implement to ensure that we do not just have Nigerians that have moved out, moved back, but we also have other nationals of other countries from Eastern Europe, from Asia, from US, from Europe, looking at Nigeria as the preferred destination for them to live, as the preferred destination for them to work. And that's the opportunity, really. So there is a need for a very bold policy statement in terms of making Nigeria the right destination for human capital globally. So that way, we are not just relying on our own human capital stock, we are also benefiting from the global trend of human capital mobility. Unfortunately, right now, we are at the receiving end because the net migration is negative for us, right? But how can that be reversed? It can be. Countries have implemented that, more importantly, so we can learn from that. And why that is also quite important when it comes to economic growth generally is that when you look at the economic growth equation, right, I think that there is a simple way to look at it. And that simple way is just to sum two major variables. It might not give you the accurate number, but directionally it is accurate, and it can give you to some extent the magnitude of economic growth that you can have. And that is basically looking at by how much is your labor force growing. The labor force growth rate, for example. Chinwe was mentioning it earlier that the labor force of Nigeria is about 160 million. That's a lot of numbers, right? And by how much is that growing on an annual basis? Technically, we can talk about probably 2 to 3% right now, right? Which means labor force is growing 2 to 3%. So if you want to estimate what the expected or potential GDP growth should be in Nigeria, all you need to do is to add the labor force growth rate plus the growth rate of labor productivity in the country. So if you want to analyze the existing growth rate based on Q1 data of about 2-3%, if our average growth rate per annum of labor force is about 2-3%, and our GDP growth rate today is about 2-3%, technically what that means is that labor productivity growth rate is 0 or negative. And that is a major disservice to us, not just short-term, but long-term. And we can see this all around us, right? For example, if you drive around Lagos, you see young people who ordinarily should be in school, who ordinarily should be building their human capital, who ordinarily the country should position to build their long-term human capital, hawking, right? Of course, they can make ends meet right now by making a couple of thousands of naira a day. But the point is, what is the long-term implication of not developing that human capital stock in the country, on the country's long-term economic growth? It is huge. If someone who ordinarily should be in school building human capital is on the street hawking, The point is that we are sacrificing the long-term contribution that that person should be having to economic growth, right? So if you look at this basic equation, it can to some extent give you an idea of what the contribution of human capital should be towards our national growth, right? So currently, without any work at all, any government naturally will inherit the demographic dividend of Nigerian structure, right? We have a lot of young people. The demographic structure is extremely young and the population is growing naturally at about 2-3%, which means any country or any government of Nigeria that is delivering less than 2-3% basically should not even have a business being in government, because naturally our population is growing at 2-3%. So what needs to be added to that is by how much can you grow the labor productivity growth, right? By how much can the labor productivity growth, be grown? So if you're targeting labor, for example, the current administration is looking at growth rate of between minimum of 6%. And that looks extremely, extremely achievable, because by virtue of our demographic structure alone, we're already registering 2-3%, right? So what needs to be taken care of is, can we then grow our labor productivity by 2-3%? If we're able to do that, that means technically our GDP growth rate is already at 6%. But can we grow labor productivity by 4-5%? Definitely yes, for two major reasons. The first is the fact that the current labor productivity is extremely low. So there is a low base effect, right? We are already in a very low state. So you can easily grow that low state significantly. It will be extremely difficult for a US, for a more advanced country, for example, to be targeting 4-5% labor productivity, because their labor productivity rate is already at this level. But given our current rate, we can expand that significantly. And these are the factors that can enable us to unlock that labor productivity. It has to do with policies, right? Policies. It has to do with infrastructure. It has to do with education. It has to do with health. How healthy is the population? Do we have the healthcare infrastructure that can support our labor force? Do we have the educational infrastructure that can support the development of young people? Do we have the educational infrastructure that can house and school the millions of young people that are out of schools today? Right. Do we have the power that can enable companies, that can enable young people acquire global skill sets? So these are things that government needs to look at. So it goes beyond just saying you want to grow the GDP. I think this thing has to be broken down into their components. So the components are the component that will drive that realization, right? So in terms of the education loan I mentioned earlier, for example, that is largely a fiscal policy, right? And it can have some component of monetary policy as well, in terms of what is the rate of that loan that students will have to get to go to school. But there has to be a stance from the executive arm that this is an institution we want to encourage to unlock the educational system. Or should we just, the government can just answer all the educational, all their support for university system, for example, and make it 100% private sector driven. That's a policy stance that needs to be taken, right? But overall, the most important thing is that we need to have a very sound educational system. We need to have a very sound healthcare system. We need to have a very sound supportive infrastructure to support our burgeoning population. And when you have these two things, frankly, I think we can easily see how important it is for us to develop our human capital stock in order to realize the economic growth objectives that we're looking for.
Thank you so much, Razak, for that elaborate contribution. I think that, again, just the same way Chinwe did explain, I hope someone in government is listening. Guys, we're running out of time, so I'm going to raise my white flag up. It's likely that we're going to extend beyond 12, just so that we can take one of the most important segments of this webinar, which is opportunities. And you can't have Andrew Nevin, Yemikale, Chinwe, Muda Yusuf, and Razak here, and they won't tell us where the opportunities are. These guys are experts, and in this segment, we're going to basically talk about it because we've now dimensioned the problems, we've come up with solutions, and now we're going to speak to opportunities. And I think I'm going to come to you, Andrew, because I've not heard from you like last 25 minutes. I'm going to come to you first, Andrew. For the average Nigerian 9-to-5 employee, what should the expectation be? First subsidy has been removed now. The government wants to unify the exchange rate. You've heard what the government wants to do in terms of human capital development, as brilliantly explained by Razak. what should young Nigerians be looking forward to? Where do they stand in this economy? Quickly, Andrew.
Well, as I said, I mean, one option, of course, is to insert themselves in global value chains. We've covered that. I mean, I think two areas that we haven't talked about very much are health and education. And in fact, we've advocated over the years, there should be a lot more focus on this because there's a huge invisible spending on health and education by Nigerians abroad. So to the extent that we can bring that back home, that's going to really improve the balance of payments more, for example, than I think import substitution in low-end manufacturing. But in terms of opportunities for young Nigerians to get trained, I mean, I think if you take healthcare sector, it's a very interesting sector because if you get skill set in health training or a qualification in health, you have the option of either serving what's going to be a growing health sector in Nigeria, or you can Japa and go somewhere else. So it gives you those options. And I think the same thing in education. So we haven't discussed these two critical sectors much in this session on that. So that's what I'll add as big opportunities, health and education. Also for investors, both of them have enormous potential in this country.
So Andrew, just to be more specific, so when you say health and education, are you suggesting that, look, if you're a Nigerian here, a young Nigerian here, or maybe an employee somewhere or an entrepreneur, these are the sectors that you should be looking at, health and education? Is that what you're saying specifically?
Yeah, I'm saying those are lots of opportunities for investment, lots of opportunities for getting jobs that are going to pay more and more. And particularly in the healthcare, it provides the opportunity to you have the option of Japa. Not that I'm encouraging people to Japa, but it creates that option for you, which I think is, it's always valuable for an individual to have options.
All right, fantastic. Dr. Kale, I'm going to come to you next. Opportunities again in terms of human capital. Of course, Razak did elaborately explain what the government can do, but from an opportunity standpoint, how can businesses benefit from this? Yeah, I mean, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, EY, most of the top big 5 or big 4 consulting firms we have in Nigeria, audit firms. I've also experienced the Japa syndrome, but there are opportunities. I think Razak just described them. How can other businesses tap into the opportunities that the human capital reforms that the government wants to do? How can we tap from them, Dr. Kala?
Well, I'll very quickly, because we're out of time, I would just basically say that embracing technology and improving access to educational services, for example, in the area of is an area of opportunity for the private sector. Scaling up edutech type services in education infrastructure, computers, tabs, online learning, and so on, and then pushing this across the country, especially in the north, where there is a huge opportunity for growth. I think the private sector business is actually, in that regard, there will be big opportunities for expansion.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Kale. Dr. Yusuf, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, quickly, sir. So, I mean, small businesses, they are the engine of economic growth for any country, even the largest economies in the world, which is the US and China and even in Europe. So how should small businesses seek opportunities which may arise from some of the planned privatization of the government? How should they also seek opportunities, or how can there be increased transparency to ensure everyone?
Yes, those things are important, but let me...
But, if a small business entrepreneur who's here was to ask you, hear from this.
I hope you can hear me. Hello?
Go ahead, sir.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Now, the point I was trying to make is that once we get the macro issues right, opportunities will emerge from every sector of this economy. Because sometimes you see opportunities in areas where you did not even expect. So my expectation is that once we get all these critical bottlenecks to investment out of the way, I'm talking about things like this fuel subsidy thing, that is going to have, in the medium to long term, very strong macroeconomic impacts. in terms of stability of the macroeconomic environment. If we get the FX unification done, because I was shocked with the release of the CBN recently, the president has talked about unification. The CBN is still talking about an official exchange of 465. So these things can also give conflicting signals. So we should be unidirectional in our signaling. The president has said it. I don't know why the CBN will come out and be saying that exchange rate is still 465. So if you get all these macro issues out of the way, a lot of opportunities will arise for SMEs, for medium companies, for large companies, for domestic companies, and for foreign investors, whether their portfolio or their FDI. So that is very critical. The macro issues for me are the most important issues. And of course, we didn't talk about trade policy. Trade is very critical to the development of any economy. There are a whole lot of issues around trade policy. There are a whole lot of issues around trade institutions, the international trade ecosystem, the problem with the ports, documentation, multiple checkpoints. All those issues are very critical, especially for those who are in the real sector of the economy. So if we're able to unlock or remove those barriers, a lot will also happen in the trade sector. So for me, I think the bigger issue is that this economy has potential for a whole lot of things to happen across all sectors. But let's do the heavy lifting. Structurally, policy-wise, regulation-wise, institution-wise. Once we remove those barriers, we have the entrepreneurs that can make things happen across all sectors. That's my view on that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf. Chinwe, I'm going to come to you next. We do want foreign investment. In fact, I also saw a chart. Someone said, look, how can we also rely less on foreign investment as a country? But before that, we do want foreign investment. Capital markets also should be looking at opportunities here. As mentioned, Nigerian exchange did pretty well. All share index did pretty well under Buhari, even though we didn't see a lot of investment from investment inflow, portfolio investment inflow from foreign investors. But how should capital markets investors position themselves? Are there specific sections of the market that will benefit from this administration? Is it the bond market? Is it the equities market? Or is it based on industries? Just like some agro producers benefited from the last administration, you did read out some of those sectors, technology, oil and gas, manufacturing, agri, transport, real estate, and power. So from your view, how should capital market investors position themselves, and even those that are currently not in the capital market but might be looking to also get into the capital market, either for fundraising via equity or via debt? Jeremy.
Thanks for that. Well, I'll give a short answer, then I'll give a larger summary. But I always say this, that whether it's the fixed income space or the equities space that you're looking at, you must always maintain a well-diversified portfolio. But yeah, the impact of any new administration on capital markets would be dynamic and will keep unfolding. So there is a need to continue to monitor market developments as they unfold. I would say there should be a conscious effort by market players to assess the policy direction and economic agenda, review stated priorities, development plans and initiatives as well. So pay attention to policies related to sectors relevant to your investment portfolio, such as infrastructure, energy, agriculture, manufacturing, and service-oriented sectors as well. As I just said, you should maintain a well-diversified portfolio across different sectors and asset classes, as of course, this would assist with spreading or mitigating the risks that could arise due to any policy or sector-related risks, if any. You should also actively engage with stakeholders, including government officials, industry leaders, and local communities. You should be deliberate with participating in investment forums. So for everyone who's logged in here, well done on that. Business associations and networking events. You need to build relationships and make sure you have your hands on the pulse of market dynamics, because all of this would help create or provide valuable insights and opportunities for you. But just this is my personal perspective and not that of the bank that I represent. I am someone who tilts towards fixed income because of my risk profile. And also because of my need for foreign exchange, I also tilt towards FX related investments as well.
All right, thank you so much for that, Chinwe. My God, we've so much run out of time. I want us to close this session at 12:15 on the dot because everyone has, even our panelists have other things. I'm going to come to you next for you're definitely not the least, but for your view on opportunities, particularly from the point of view of fintech and financial services. We do know that during the last administration, that's when we probably saw the largest fintech wave in Nigeria. Are there still this opportunity available for the current other areas that will fintech? Razak still there?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, so I think for fintech and financial services generally, I believe the opportunities haven't changed at all, especially at fundamental level, right? The opportunities for financial services and fintech generally haven't changed at all with the new administration coming on board. There are structural opportunities that exist, and they will continue to exist by virtue of the state of our economy, by virtue of our population, and more importantly, by virtue of the level of penetrations of key financial service indicators, right? From credit to payment to number of people who have bank accounts to number of people who have access to basic financial services. Those indicators are still pretty low right now. So even when you look at the size of the size of players in the financial service ecosystem in Nigeria, say, for example, the average size of Nigerian banks compared to, say, an average bank in Egypt or in South Africa. So they are still pretty small. Not talk of how when you compare that with the average banks in, say, in more developed countries, right? So overall, the indicators of financial service provisions are still very low. So what the existing administration can do, or what we expect, is to quicken the realization of those opportunities, right? To enable those opportunities to be realized as quickly as possible by way of policy enablements, policies that can enable the actualization of those opportunities. And I'll speak to just two of those policies, for example. Say the exchange rates as just one macro indicator. The exchange rate is a primary linkage between any economy and the rest of the world. And because the world today is globally interconnected, if your exchange rate is extremely volatile, what you've done technically is you've injected volatility into how your economy is linked to the rest of the world. You want to ensure that stability, because that stability is what will engender capital flow, either in or out of the country. And if you look at the financial services, I'm talking about banks, I'm talking about insurance, and even the fintech sectors, there is a strong linkage between the performance of this sector and global capital movements. So if FX instability is what we'll experience on a daily basis, then the growth of the financial service industry and fintech would definitely be affected because there's a strong linkage between these sectors and global capital mobility. So if the existing the new administration can tackle that as an example, it will naturally enhance the realization of these opportunities as quickly as possible. Then the second one is, say, inflation. Inflation is very volatile right now. It has long-term implication on what the interest rate will be. It has long-term implication on what the purchasing power of an average individual will be. And it has long-term implication of what people will eventually buy and the various sectors where they are purchasing from. So if the existing administration can tackle key macro indicators like exchange rates, inflation, interest rates, I think it will not only increase the existing opportunities within the financial service industry, but it will enhance the realization of those opportunities as quickly as possible. Yeah.
All right, fantastic, Razak. Thank you so much for summarizing it brilliantly. We have come to the end of the panelist session. It was such and engaging and interesting section. Section is blue, or in fact blew up. Joanna, that is it from me and Rotus. Pass the baton back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all our panelists. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions and contributions on today's session. Our time is fast spent, but I'm sure you've gained a lot, probably jotters full of notes that you've taken from the insight that our analysts and our panelists have given and provided. But not to worry, we do follow up with these conversations. Yes, we may not have the economic, outlook webinar as often, but we do follow up with these conversations on Twitter. We have our Twitter spaces that we do weekly, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. So you can always join the conversation there. If you do have questions, you can ask them there, as well as follow the money on Saturdays as well at 10 a.m. So be a part of that. So yes, and aside from that, there is the economic outlook bullets, right? Yes, we have our very own product, the yearly deals book, I beg your pardon. There's a compilation of all the deals that happened in the year 2022, which have been carefully curated deals with a list of investors across the year. This book, of course, is designed to provide you with competitive edge in the ever-changing world of income. So make sure you get your hands on that book. And of course, Nairametrics is your trusted platform that provides you with the latest news, analysis, insights into the Nigerian and the global economy, as well as the financial market. So make sure you follow Nairametrics on Twitter, on Instagram, get the latest updates. Check out some of the articles as well by some experts. You can get details on some of the things we've talked about today, nairametrics.com. Thank you so much for your time. Apologies once again. In case you have missed out segments or you may want to replay parts of this webinar, feel free. It will be uploaded on YouTube any moment now, and you get the notification if and when you follow us on Twitter and Instagram. So thank you for your time. Thank you to all our panelists. So much insights. Thank you to our moderators as well, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
All right, thank you so much, Joanna. Just to also add that all the questions that you asked, you're going to get the responses in your email. We're going to, I'm sure that our panelists will respond to those questions, and then we'll collect them and share to everyone's email address. Thank you all so much again for being a part of this. We do appreciate every single person. And of course, to our sponsors, Quackle, for helping us put this together. It wasn't easy putting this together. So thank you so much for being a part of it. And to our participants, thank you all so much. I think at some point we had over 500 people right here logged in, listening to this very exciting session. And Andrew, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. Razak, thank you so much for being there. And to Chinwe, this is probably your second or third time being on this economic outlook. Thank you so much. Of course, Dr. Moda Yusuf, thank you as well. And to my Oga, Dr. Yemi Kale, thank you so much, sir, for honoring this session. And of course, my very good friend Ruth, you and I banter very soon at Arise. Trust me, I'm coming at you very soon at Arise. Thank you so much for this. To Joanna as well, moderating this very and Metrics team for putting this together. Thank you so much. And to all our participants, again, thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of your weekend. This is Nairametrics signing out. Goodbye.